This is Captain Ross, 3B's Captain School, and this is our Marpol video for Upgrade OUPV to Masters 100 Tons course. Marpol, this is the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships. And this is the main international convention that covers such pollution in the marine environment. It includes regulations aimed at preventing and minimizing pollution from ships, both accidental and that from routine operations, and currently includes 6 technical annexes. The first annex we're going to discuss is Annex 1, and this deals with oil pollution and contains regulations to prevent oil spills and manage oily water discharges from ships. So, like I said, it covers oil pollution from accidents and normal shipboard operations, requires treatment of engine room bilge water and other tanks, especially before it's discharged into the sea. It's enforced by the U.S. Coast Guard in the U.S. through the Port State Control Program. So the U.S. Coast Guard enforces it on U.S. ships through their normal boarding process, and then on foreign ships that visit U.S. waters through the Port State Control Program. One example of Annex 1 being used to prosecute a vessel or owners of a vessel for an oil spill. The operator of the motor tanker PS Dream pled guilty in 2024 and agreed to pay a fine of $2 million for dumping oil at sea and falsifying a ship's oil record log. So one of the requirements in Annex 1 is that ships maintain an oil record log to kind of track all the oil products coming in and leaving the ship. Criminal case with the PS Dream stemmed from a report of a crew member who in January of 2023 contacted the Coast Guard in New Orleans, which was their next port of call, and shared a video that he took of oil being pumped overboard and trailing behind the tanker. When the ship arrived in New Orleans 2 weeks later, that the crew member that reported the oil violation and another crew member blew the whistle and provided evidence to the Coast Guard. They had videos, photographic images, and their statements, and that was used to basically prosecute the owner of the PS Dream, and they ended up pleading guilty to those charges and paying a pretty big fine there. So Annex 2 is noxious liquid substances, and these provide guidelines for the disposal of noxious liquids. Details the discharge criteria and measures for the control of pollution by noxious liquid substances carried in bulk on ships. It expressly prohibits discharge within 12 miles of nearest land. It contains over 250 liquids divided into 4 categories, and these are X, Y, Z, and other substances, which would be OS. X includes substances that pose the greatest risk to the marine environment. Details the cleaning and sanitizing requirements for containers and or compartments used to carry these noxious liquids. The Coast Guard, if you want more information on that or how that's basically policed, the Coast Guard has an NVIC 0306 that contains their guidance on the implementation and policies enforcing how they're going to enforce Annex 2 of Marpol. Annex 3 of Marpol deals with harmful substances in packaged form and contains the rules for transportation of these substances. It sets standards for packaging, marking, labeling, documentation, and stowage of harmful substances. These substances are identified as marine pollutants in accordance with the IMDG code. Packages containing harmful substances must be durably marked with the correct technical name and indicate that the substance is a marine pollutant, and the marking must remain identifiable even after prolonged submersion. They actually say in this annex that the marking on these packages has to be such that it would last for 3 months of immersion in the sea. So that way it can be identified on the ship, it can be identified when it's being moved to shore, and then if something happened to the ship, a container got knocked off or the ship sank at sea or something, and they were cleaning up the packages or the debris from the ship, those packages, the marking would be identifiable at least 3 months later. Also, they're pretty strict on trade names. So if there's a product that has a trade name and a different technical name, the packaging has to include that technical name, like the official name of that product. Next, we have Annex 4, which is from sewage pollution. These regulations regarding the discharge of sewage from ship basically are geared towards vessels over 400 gross tons or that carry more than 15 passengers for hire on international voyages. So if you're operating a T-boat on international voyage, you would have to follow Annex 4 if you had more than 15 passengers or you're over 400 gross tons, which you wouldn't be a T-boat if you're over 400 gross tons, but you could be a T-boat carrying 15 or more passengers on an international voyage. The U.S. waters and our vessels that we are all mainly going to captain, we follow the rules under the Clean Water Act that basically mirror this Annex 4 for sewage pollution. So they apply to us through the Clean Water Act, not Annex 4 of Marpol. But basically it regulates pollution of the sea by sewage and requires vessels to discharge pulverized and disinfected sewage using an approved system more than 3 nautical miles from land or more than 12 nautical miles from land if the sewage is not pulverized and disinfected. Section 312 of the Clean Water Act is where it requires the use of operable U.S. Coast Guard certified marine sanitation devices, toilets, on board U.S. vessels that are equipped with installed toilets and operating on U.S. nautical waters. Again, untreated sewage discharges are prohibited within 3 nautical miles of land. Here's some examples of these different marine sanitation devices, not actual devices, but how the devices would work. So a type 1, it's a flow-through treatment device, and it uses maceration and disinfection for the treatment of sewage. Maybe only installed on vessels of less than or equal to 65 foot in length, and it must produce an effluent with no visible solids and a fecal chloroform bacterial count of not greater than 1,000 per 100 milliliters. As you can see, I'll use my cursor here to kind of, you have the actual toilet here, and the waste is sent to a holding tank, and then it is either discharged for pump out to a facility on shore or overboard. And this is a macerator, so it's got some kind of device in there that will pulverize or macerate the waste. The second type is a type 2, and this is a flow-through treatment device that may use a biological treatment and disinfectant. It may be installed in any length of vessel and must produce an effluent with a fecal chloroform bacterial count of not greater than 200 per 100 milliliters. Remember, type 1 was 1,000, so it could have much more. No more than 150 milligrams of total suspended solids per liter. And then type 3 is typically a holding tank where the sewage is stored until it can be discharged shoreside or at sea, which beyond 3 miles because it doesn't macerate or disinfect the solids or the waste. May be installed at any length, and there's no performance standard. It must be designed to prevent the overboard discharge of treated or untreated sewage or any waste derived from sewage. One of the most important things for us is if you're using a holding tank system on your vessel, you have to have the valves shut so it prevents any kind of accidental discharge when you're operating within 3 miles from shore. So make sure you or your crew shut those valves when you're operating that 3 miles. You can open them once you're out if you decide you want to discharge that waste, depending on which type of system you have, 1, 2, or 3. But it's on the captain or the master of the vessel to make sure that system is set up so you're not discharging illegally. All right, next we got Annex 5, which is garbage pollution. So this deals with different types of garbage and specifies the distance from land and the way they may be disposed of, the way the garbage may be disposed of. The most important feature of this annex is the complete ban on the disposal into the sea of all forms of plastics. So there's nowhere you can legally dispose of plastic at sea. Garbage retention requires us to meet the garbage discharge, waste management plan, and placard requirements of 33 CFR Part 151. So that's the U.S. law. The master or person in charge of vessels over 40 feet is responsible for ensuring that a written waste management plan is on board and that each person handling garbage follows that plan. That plan must describe the vessel's procedures for collecting, processing, storing, and discharging garbage, and designate the person who is in charge of carrying out the plan. So that waste management plan, master or person in charge is responsible for ensuring, one, that there is a plan, two, that it covers the required elements, and three, that each person on board actually follows the plan. Requirements for fuel, oil, sulfur content, and includes regulations related to energy efficiency for ships. And that energy efficiency, I mean, the better ships are that works better for everybody. These ships are in business, so the better fuel economy they get, the less expensive it costs them to ship these goods across the oceans. And then it's better for all of us because the less they pollute, the less pollution we have to deal with. So some significant provisions. One, it limits NOx, which is nitrogen monoxide and nitrogen dioxide, which are formed when nitrogen and oxygen combine at high temperatures. So if you picture, a combustion engine, it's going to produce high temperatures, and nitrogen and oxygen are combined at those high temperatures. These substances are a significant form of air pollution. They contribute to acid rain, ozone layer issues, and respiratory issues. It limits the sulfur content in marine fuels. And then ships operating up to 200 nautical miles off U.S. shores must meet the most advanced standards for these emissions and use low sulfur fuels. So they're really kind of, in the U.S., set it so anything within 200 miles has the strictest requirements to help kind of keep pollution off our shores. U.S. flag vessels are subject to the normal inspections you would get from the U.S. Coast Guard. Foreign flag vessels, when they come into U.S. waters or use a U.S. port, they're inspected under the port state control laws. So that's the laws they use to inspect foreign vessels and make sure that they are in compliance with these Annex 6 air pollution requirements. All right, just a quick summary of what we've covered in this Marpol section. Annex 1, oil pollution. Annex 2 was the noxious liquids. Annex 3 was harmful substances in packaged form. Remember, that had some labeling requirements and everything. Annex 4 was sewage. Annex 5 was garbage. And Annex 6 dealt with air pollution. The U.S. has signed all 6 of these annexes, so we're required by international law to abide by all 6. This concludes our Marpol video for our Upgrade OUPV to Masters 100 Tons course.